In this video, I'm going to be looking at the different adaptations of our body systems due to training. I will specifically be looking at a netball player within netball in the position of centre. In netball, there are different aerobic and anaerobic parts to the sport. For example, if the player is jogging up and down the court, this is aerobic, whereas sudden quick sprints or jumps to block passes or receive a pass are anaerobic. Therefore, jogging up and down the court is of a longer duration and a lower intensity than the jumps and sprints, which are of very short duration and high intensity. Netball players need multiple components of fitness. These are their aerobic capacity, also known as cardiovascular endurance or stamina, muscular power, agility, speed, coordination, balance and reaction time, meaning the netball players need to train lots of different aspects of their body. For their aerobic fitness, they need to start training that is continuous and is of a long duration for their muscles. For anaerobic training, they need short, fast bursts of exercises to strengthen their different muscles to improve their speed, muscular power, agility and balance. So an example of a training type that the centre player could use to improve their aerobic capacity is altitude training. Running 2 to 3 times a week at altitude over a distance between 5 and 10 kilometres over a period of 6 weeks will significantly increase the ability to keep jogging throughout the game without fatiguing. To increase the intensity of this training, they would add in fartlek training, so they would alternate between jogging, running and sprinting. This will not only help with aerobic fitness, but also partially with their anaerobic, so therefore helping with transitions during a game from jogging up and down the court to suddenly having to sprint to block or receive a pass. However, only one of the sessions a week would be fartlek, as they will complete further training to improve their anaerobic fitness. For their anaerobic training, they would complete a circuit training session twice a week. These activities would be fairly short, last 20 seconds each way and 10 seconds rest between each exercise, and the circuit would be completed 3 times in the session. There would be around 10 different exercises, for example, squat jumps, shuttle runs, chest passes at a very quick pace, burpees, medicine ball twist, wall sit, skipping, high knees, tuck jumps over hurdles, standing lunges with dumbbells. These exercises will help to improve muscular power, speed, agility, coordination and balance. So this aerobic and anaerobic training will therefore cause adaptations to the player's cardiovascular system, respiratory system, neuromuscular system, energy systems and the skeletal system. We'll now look at aerobic training and its effects on the cardiovascular system, because there's a very large amount of adaptations to the cardiovascular system. So we already know that the CV system role in exercise is crucial, as it provides the body with oxygenated blood to be sent to the muscles and to allow them to continue working effectively. Therefore, it is closely linked to aerobic performance because we need oxygen to perform aerobically. For example, from this VO2 max graph, we can see that with training, an athlete reaches their VO2 max later on in the test and at a higher speed. This means that they have reached the maximum consumption, utilization and distribution of their oxygen later on in exercise, simply meaning their performance is improved. Now we can look at adaptations that happen specifically to the heart. A process known as cardiac hypertrophy takes place due to the heart muscles being worked when exercising, which is when an unusual thickening of the heart wall takes place. The rest of the heart also increases in size due to being worked. Therefore, both of these things allow a greater contractile force, which leads to a greater stroke volume and lower resting heart rate, as the heart contractions are stronger, meaning more blood is ejected, therefore increasing cardiac output so that the heart does not have to pump as many times to eject the same volume of blood as before. This is known as athlete's heart, simply an enlarged heart and a lower resting heart rate than usual. As you can see from the table with stroke volume data, the more training an athlete completes, the higher volume of blood is pumped out per beat because the contractions are more forceful. As you can see from the heart rate graph, as well, with training, the heart rate does not have to increase as much during exercise to meet the demands placed on it, and the heart's recovery is much quicker, so it reaches resting values faster, which are also lower than without training. These adaptations have a very small amount or no effect to all cardiac output at rest, but its maximal value increases dramatically due to the fact that stroke volume has also increases. Blood pressure also changes due to cardiac hypertrophy, so the systolic value is lowered. There is less arterial pressure needed to pump the volume of blood needed out of the aorta because the heart's contractile force is strengthened. This also leads to an increase in cardiac output. Now we will look at changes around our blood. Training leads to the creation of large capillary networks to certain parts of the body known as capillarization, which allows greater diffusion of oxygen to the working muscles and larger removal of carbon dioxide. Exercise or training also increases the number of red blood cells in the body, so it enhances the ability to transport oxygen to the working muscles when training or competing. Aerobic training also makes our total blood volume change. It increases rapidly, meaning the volume of plasma also increases due to the increase in plasma proteins, which allows water retention and calcium retention, meaning the athlete will stay hydrated for longer and muscle contractions will continue to a high enough standard. The increase in total blood volume also stops and decreases in venous return because of capillarization. Aerobic exercise can therefore help prevent certain cardiovascular diseases, as it lowers blood pressure, therefore reducing the strain that it puts on the heart as it becomes more able. So, for example, it can help hypertension because if the heart doesn't have to work as hard every time it beats, then the pressure on your arteries is reduced. Now we'll look at aerobic adaptation to the respiratory system. Ventilation with training decreases at a submaximal intensity but will still increase at maximal intensity, due to there being an increase in tidal volume and breathing rate. So with training, ventilation decreases as the provision of oxygen is easier with a greater tidal volume. Vital capacity also has the ability to increase, which allows deeper and therefore more oxygenated breaths, which leads to a trained athlete's ventilation being able to increase by 50%. As you can now see from the VO2 max ventilation graph, that as the duration and intensity increase, the athlete is now able to provide the oxygen needed to complete the activity. Our breathing rate also adapts to increasing to deliver more oxygen to our working muscles. During exercise, however, over time, tidal volume of an athlete increases, therefore increasing the amount of air being taken into the lungs, and then decreasing our breathing rate because our lungs now have the capacity to take in and use larger amounts of oxygen at a time. As you can see from the data on all the components of the respiratory system, everything decreases except for vital capacity, which increases, allowing more oxygen uptake, as I said earlier. All of the athlete's respiratory muscles would become stronger due to the stress they are put under during the training, which then means the inspiration and expiration will be more forceful, allowing for quicker intake and increased uptake of oxygen and increased expulsion of carbon dioxide. Because these muscles are now stronger, it means fatigue will be induced later on in exercise, and training, as I said earlier, increases tidal volume and vital capacity, which therefore also increases our resting lung volumes, meaning that everyday tasks become a lot easier, such as walking, and that we don't have to breathe as much in order to provide the oxygen for this. In terms of gaseous exchange, the alveoli to the capillaries, the alveoli are well adapted to only allow selected materials through. So deeper alveolar ventilation allows for better gas exchange, because more oxygen is being taken into the alveoli, so more is diffusing into the capillaries for the oxygen to be efficiently sent to the working muscles, therefore increasing the diffusion rate. So for example, as these adaptations took place and our centre player was performing another run at altitude, her O2 deficit would be shorter and O2 deficit, which is the oxygen shortage during exercise, would become much smaller, and her epoch recovery stage would be much shorter and faster because the body would learn to adapt to go back to resting values faster and therefore remove waste products faster. So for our cardiovascular system and respiratory system, there are no exact anaerobic adaptations that take place. So anaerobic training will help in terms of recovery and fatigue, and these will both adapt, so that recovery will be faster and fatigue, for example, from the build-up of lactic acid will start later, therefore lowering the intensity of performance later on in exercise. Anaerobic training will also build up the muscular strength of the muscles in this system, e.g. the heart or intercostal muscles, so making it easier for them to work at a higher intensity. As a result of this, removal of waste products will also be quicker. Next is the neuromuscular system. We will look at any adaptations to this from aerobic or anaerobic training that are very useful. We will start by looking at aerobic adaptations. With training, the number and size of slow oxidative fibres will increase. This adaptation is very supportive of aerobic activities, These fibres are fatigue resistant, therefore mean the athlete/performer will be able to perform for longer before fatiguing. The adaptations of an increased number of capillaries supports the neuromuscular system, as there are more to supply each of these fibres with a higher level of oxygen, also helping to prevent fatigue. This training also increases the level of myoglobin in the muscles. This is the substance that stores and carries oxygen in our muscles. It can increase from around 75 to 80%, which therefore goes hand in hand with the fact that more capillary networks are developing in the muscles, meaning there is an increase in oxygen, so the increase in myoglobin allows the amount of oxygen to be carried and stored in the muscles because it has the capacity to. The number of mitochondria can also increase, which allows more energy to be produced for exercise, and they also produce chemicals used to break down waste products. However, this does depend on the amount of training that is completed. We will now look at the adaptations to this system caused by anaerobic training. Muscular hypertrophy takes place with this training because there is a greater resistance. Hypertrophy is when the existing muscle tissue cross-sectional size increases, as there is an increase in the muscle's myofibrils, but also connective tissue such as tendons. This in turn makes the muscles more pliable and simply means they are more flexible and more mobile, allowing for quicker sudden movements, in this case a sudden sprint for example. There are also muscle fibre adaptations, specifically fast oxidative and fast glycolytic, where exercise can cause an increase in the amount of actin and myosin, which are contractile proteins, allowing for stronger contractions, and increases the amount these fibres will be recruited. A process known as hyperplasia can also occur, which is the splitting of muscle cells, which supposedly allows muscle growth. However, this is controversial and more research is being done into whether it really is an adaptation. Our skeletal muscles go through hypertrophy. Also, our tendons increase in strength and size in order to meet the increased stress and demand, which in turn allows for stronger contractile forces, but at the same time then prevents injury. If the netball player is able to produce great contractile responses, this will allow for faster and stronger sudden movements, therefore increasing their level of performance. An athlete's muscles can also go through a process known as muscle tone, which is acquired through effective training in which there is an unconscious low level of contraction at rest, which keeps the muscles ready, and it helps to maintain posture and balance, helping the performer with pivoting again, which helps with quick reflex actions. Aerobic training also causes adaptations to our energy systems. We have already established that there are cellular changes, for example, the increase of number and size of our mitochondria. But this means there will also be an increased level of our body's aerobic enzymes, which in turn allows for slow twitch muscle fibers to produce more ATP and for a longer amount of time, which therefore increases the athlete's performance, especially in terms of duration. Over prolonged periods of training, our body learns to use fat as a fuel, which therefore spares glycogen. With sufficient levels of oxygen, our body can break down fat into a fuel, which allows the athlete to prolong their training or competing. This also then spares glycogen, which means that ATP is then also kept on reserve, and the build-up of the lactic acid is much more likely to be less. If lactic acid was able to be produced, this would then inhibit the production of energy, as it inhibits the enzymes needed to break down the pyruvic acid further. So exercise can continue on aerobically. As your level of fitness increases, oxygen is able to break down the lactate in order to prevent it entering your bloodstream and decreasing your performance. For example, if you continuously train at just below maximal for around 30 minutes, your body's tolerance of lactic acid increases. The point where your body can no longer prevent the lactic acid from entering your bloodstream is known as OBLA, and as you can see from the graph showing that with training, the point of where lactic acid begins to build up and begins to affect the athlete's performance are both later than before.